Hello everyone, this is part 7 of What If Naruto Travels Back in Time, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Just under 2 years later. Master. Hey, Master, wait up. Naruto stopped walking, turning to look over his shoulder with a small smile on his face. He'd recognized that loud, boisterous voice anywhere. A young girl who was nearly 8 years old came to a skidding halt next to him as he watched, amused. His smile grew as he noticed the gleaming protector on her forehead with the leaf insignia emblazoned upon it. Before he could say anything, the girl pointed at him and yelled, "I did it, Master. Now you owe me a jutsu. You promised me that you'd teach me one after I graduated." Chuckling, Naruto nodded. "That I did. I always keep my promises." Walking over, he leaned over and gave the girl a brief hug, which she quickly returned before mumbling about being embarrassed. "Sorry, Anko. I didn't mean to embarrass you. Let's go celebrate for a bit. What do you want for lunch?" "Dango." The shout came as no surprise to Naruto, so he simply nodded and gestured for the purple-haired girl to follow. He was just wandering around the village aimlessly right now anyway as he was waiting for her class to get out. Many of the random people they met in the street would nod and greet Naruto as he walked by with his young apprentice, many even offering her their own congratulations to the girl. He'd never seen that big a smile stay on her face for so long. Almost 2 years ago, the Sandaime had shown him the list of the current academy students, as well as those who would be enrolling soon. The moment his eyes drifted across the name Mitarashi Anko, he had requested to take her as an apprentice on the spot. Of course Hiruzen seemed a bit put out by that, obviously hoping he would have taken a full team. Once Naruto explained about who Anko was in the future, and how she had been abandoned by Orochimaru, however, he understood completely. Naruto had no problem taking a full team after his initial training with Anko was finished and she became a genin. But he wanted to give one of his old friends from during the war a better early career where she wouldn't be abandoned like trash and instead be treated with respect for the rest of her tenure as a shinobi. Anko was an orphan, apparently both of her parents were killed during the Second War. She also thought she had an older sibling, but was too young to remember clearly and only heard rumors. She went on a brief search when she was apprenticed to Naruto, but had so far not found anything. Then again, there was only so much a girl her age could do. Naruto was honestly pleased with both Anko and his own teaching skills which had come a long way since Konohamaru. He was able to teach her well enough so that she was able to burn through the academy programs and graduate in 2 years, when the full program ran for 6, and up to 8 if you included remedial classes. Now that they were in wartime though, the academy was trying to pump all their students out in a maximum of 4 years. He had managed to make Anko good enough in half that time. Sure, she was no Hitaki Kakashi or alternate Itachi, but she was very skilled in her own right for someone so young. He had also been teaching her things that weren't in the academy curriculum, such as tree climbing and water walking, and had also figured out that she had an affinity for water chakra. The only thing he wouldn't do was teach her any proper jutsu other than the academy basics before she graduated. At first she seemed rather put out by that fact, but then when he told her the stronger she was when she graduated, the stronger the techniques he could teach her, she gave it all she had. He didn't want to spoil the girl too much, if anything Mikoto did that enough for him. In fact, his wife would have already adopted the girl if not for the fact that families were not allowed to apprentice their own children. If they wanted her, Naruto wouldn't be allowed to be her master anymore. He offered Anko the option, of course, but the girl was fine being the only Mitarashi. She wanted to keep Naruto as her sensei. That didn't stop her from calling him Dad on occasion when they were alone. The first time she did it a scant few months ago, she surprised herself if the look on her face was anything to go by. She quickly slapped her hands over her mouth as she stared at him, blushing red, then quickly began stuttering out how she didn't mean to, apologizing while panicked. When he pulled her into a hug and told her he was flattered, she began to cry, saying she didn't want to upset him because she turned down his previous offer. He told her that she could call him that whenever she wanted to, even if it wasn't official on paper. He was also able to fondly remember the first time she had called Mikoto Mom, just to see her reaction. His wife literally melted right in front of their eyes, and he had to pull Anko out of the woman's grasp as she was going to suffocate his apprentice with her own hug. The girl obviously took their reactions to heart, as after a couple months of training she had asked to move out of her lonely village subsidized apartment and into the Uchiha district near them. They were more than happy to oblige. As for the Uchiha clan and the district in general, Mikoto had taken up the mantle of clan head nearly a year ago and had plenty of good ideas, though it went without saying that she often came to her husband for his advice and thoughts on nearly every action. Many Uchiha often joked that the clan had two heads, but they worked so well together that no one was complaining about it to the best of their knowledge. In regards to the district itself, it had also been through quite a few changes. One of the first things Naruto had suggested to Mikoto once she was made clan head was that they remove the wall around the compound, or at least most of it. She was skeptical at first, but upon listening to his explanation, she agreed it made sense and went along with it. It was what he called step one in his plan to get the Uchiha more involved with the village as a whole, and to do it in ways that seemed small at first but would gradually change not only the clan, but the village as well. The elders and most of the older generations didn't seem to care about the wall one way or another, which they took as a good sign. The rest of the village was surprised but pleased, not to mention that Hiruzen thought it was brilliant. The rumor going around was that the Hyuga, the only other clan with all wall around their compound, were also thinking of tearing theirs down too. Uchiha clan members were now encouraged to live anywhere in the village that they wanted, which made for many happy clan members as some felt suffocated being stuck on Uchiha clan grounds. Not only that, but people from outside of the village were allowed to live and do business on clan grounds, if they wished, but they were charged a premium in rent and merchant fees. None of them complained about the premium since they were able to live and do business in what was quickly becoming the most popular and best protected area of the village. Of course, all of Naruto's plans didn't go into effect without some grumbling. Fugaku was more often than not at the forefront, though Naruto was unsure if the man was putting himself out there as Naruto's opposition just because he had a grudge, or if he had legitimate issues. They never really talked to each other unless they absolutely had to, so Naruto tended to avoid the military police headquarters unless Mikoto sent him there because she didn't want to deal with him. Fugaku was always too much into the status quo and didn't appear to handle change very well, if the grimace constantly on his face was any indication. Minato had joked more than once that Naruto was whipped, and Naruto didn't argue the point. Sure, he might have had to do some things he didn't really want to, but on the other hand he was happier than he could ever remember being before, so he didn't mind doing pretty much anything his wife asked. That wasn't to say he had any major problems with Fugaku, because he didn't. They just didn't really get along at all, and neither of them put any effort into fixing things between them. Fugaku seemed to begrudgingly accept the fact that Naruto was doing quite a lot of good for the clan, even for someone who wasn't an Uchiha by blood. He didn't bother Naruto about things, and in return Naruto was completely hands-off with the military police. He only asked for quarterly reports, which he always got right on time. So long as there were no issues, it would likely stay that way for the foreseeable future. He heard Anko start to chatter excitedly, and looked to see what she was making a fuss about. From the looks of things, not only had they arrived, but Minato was there as well with his team, which he had just gotten a little under a year ago. At the same time he got his team, Hiruzen had surprised Minato by telling him that he would be Hokage when the war was over. The four friends had a small party that night in congratulations, but sadly had to end it early because Minato was whining that the Hokage wanted him up early for his new training to start. The full announcement was supposedly going to be made to the village later this month, and from the looks of things they were already getting started on adding his face to the mountain. This of course made the village rumor mill go crazy, many thinking that the next Hokage would be either Hatake Tsukumo or Orochimaru. Naruto's focus shifted from the mountain back over to his apprentice, who had run ahead excitedly, yammering about how she had graduated and showing each member of Minato's team in turn. Chuckling to himself, he grinned at the younger blonde and sat down in an empty chair next to his friend. I don't think I've ever seen you over here with your team before. Minato shrugged, idly waving around a dango stick he seemed to be nibbling on. Obito wanted to try something different today, and for once Kakashi didn't disagree. So, here we are. No comments from Rin-chan either. Nope. But she's usually agreeable to anything either of them say anyway. Naruto nodded. He hadn't gotten to know the members of Minato's team as well as he would have liked, but since they were consistently out on missions he never really got any opportunities. The few chances he did have also forced him to split his attention between them and Anko, though his apprentice obviously always got priority. He already knew Kakashi through Tsukumo, not to mention the one mission they went on a while ago. Kakashi seemed a lot more open and friendly with his father still alive, though he still had that slightly aloof attitude that easily pissed people off. He didn't know if this Kakashi got along better with Obito or not, and he didn't want to be nosy with someone else's team, but he couldn't help but be curious. In general, Kakashi was simply much more pleasant than he had been expecting, knowing more about the man's past from his now alternate future than anyone else. Some of that may have had to do with the general feeling of hero worship that Kakashi often hit him with. While it wasn't extreme by any means, it wasn't unusual for Kakashi to come to Naruto for advice instead of Minato or even his father. Tsukumo took it all in stride, but Minato appeared to be rather put out whenever it happened. When Naruto asked Kakashi why he didn't ask others, the only real response he got was that Naruto just so happened to be the strongest person he knew. When questioned about his father or the Hokage, the only response was, "I've never seen him fight." It made sense, though Minato's grumblings would have a habit of getting to Kushina, and then both Naruto and Kakashi would suffer her wrath. It wasn't bad, per se, and nowhere near as bad as what she would do to someone who she was legitimately angry with. Still, she sometimes put a little extra effort into actually trying to hurt him during their frequent training sessions. In regards to Obito, the teen regarded him with complete awe the few times they had met. He assumed it was just because of him being married to the clan head, and perhaps even a few tall tales from Kakashi, but apparently that wasn't all. Obito's parents had claimed that bringing Naruto into the clan was a godsend, and they had respect again thanks to him. They were getting along with the rest of the village better than they had since the short reign of the Nadaime Hokage and when he implemented the military police. Obito's parents nearly worshipped him, and as a result, that had sort of passed on to the young boy. Naruto had asked Mikoto if Obito was related to her in any way, but she wasn't aware of him being immediate family. He was only very slightly upset about not having a nephew to spoil. Of course that didn't stop him from teaching the boy a prank or three. Minato never stopped griping about it though, saying he didn't want his team to have a bad reputation, so Naruto had recently refrained from teaching the boy anything new, but instead had him practicing his stealth so that he could prank but not get caught. Last but not least, there was Rin. She was the quiet one of their team, and also filled in the role similar to what Sakura was on his first team. He'd seen her patching up Obito and Kakashi after training and spars, though she never used the mystical palm technique, so he guessed that she didn't know it. As far as he knew, Minato didn't know the technique either. However, he knew in his time she had done Kakashi's eye transplant, so if she did know it now she just chose not to use it for some reason. Rin must have noticed him looking at her, because she immediately looked away and blushed, a small smile on her face. Naruto couldn't help but chuckle a little. From the moment they met she seemed to have developed a small crush on him. When he tried talking to the girl she always had a hard time looking him in the eye when she responded, not to mention the blush that always began working over her cheeks. Of course it may also have been some sort of hero worship, considering who her other two teammates were. Of course there was also the fact that between looks, skill, and general demeanor it was no secret that women stared at both him and Minato whenever they were together in the village. It was cute listening to Kushina and Mikoto growl about it, while conveniently forgetting that they often were stared at as well by the men. "Any idea when you're going to start doing missions with her?" he heard Minato's voice ask. It only took a second for Naruto's mind to catch on. "Not any time really soon. Hokage-sama was saying he doesn't want me going out without a full team. He's probably going to give me 2 more kids to work with before he gives us anything." Quote. He saw Minato nod out of the corner of his eye. "Makes sense. You're a good teacher. I don't think he'd want you to only have one student. I don't really care one way or the other. I'm happy with the one I have. If I get more, I'll adjust." When Naruto finished talking, one of the waitresses came over and took his order. Anko noticed this and rather loudly offered her opinion on what to get, and with a chuckle he decided to get it for them. As Anko went back to start chatting with the other team, Naruto took a moment to look around. It was a rather busy afternoon, though he believed part of that had to do with the academy's graduation. People were bustling about all over the place, even though the little dango shop they were at wasn't really on any of the main roads in the village, it was still rather busy. He always imagined villages to be rather quiet during wartime, but Konoha actually seemed to be busier than before. A lot of that may have had to do with the previous arrivals from 2 years ago, but even after they settled in the village continued growing. Konoha's current size and relative power when compared to the other hidden villages was likely the reason that none had officially declared war on him yet, even though Konoha had been running plenty of interference for their allies, especially in grass, waterfall, and rain. Without warning, one of the village Anbu dropped down into his field of vision, and moved forward swiftly. All of the shinobi present stopped talking and turned to stare, likely to see if they would be the one called. But the way the Anbu was purposefully striding towards him led Naruto to believe that he was the current target. Everyone else started turning back to their business when they realized this as well. Sure enough, once the Anbu was close enough, he stopped a few steps away and gave a swift bow. Uchiha-sama, Hokage-sama requests your presence as soon as possible. Naruto nodded slowly. Any idea what it's about? No. He just asked me to deliver the message. Thank you. Dismissed. The Anbu immediately disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Any idea what he wants you for? Minato's question caused Naruto to look at the other blonde as he stood up. Since Anko graduated, Naruto shrugged, probably something about a team so he can send me on missions, I'd bet. Well, let me know when you find out, if you can. Of course, Naruto grinned. Reaching into one of the pockets of his vest, he pulled some money out and handed it to Minato. The other blonde nodded, knowing that it was to pay for the food that he had ordered but wouldn't get to eat. Honestly, he wasn't that hungry, so it was more for Anko than him. His eyes sought out the youngest member among the group, only to see her with a questioning expression on her face. Smiling briefly as he walked over to where she was sitting, he gently poked the side of her arm. You can stay and eat with Team Minato. Don't cause them any trouble, alright. Anko answered by giving him a big smile and a, yeah. Good. If you have anything left over and your friends don't want any, just take what's left over back home and Mikoto will show you where to put it. Once he got another firm nod, he chuckled before looking at Obito. The other Uchiha looked startled at first to be stared at by one of the clan heads, but quickly tried to cover it with a neutral expression that Naruto was getting used to seeing. Naruto placed his hand on top of Obito's head and rubbed it for a second, since the kid had goggles around his neck for some reason. Just like he expected, Obito immediately scowled and tried to fix it, even though his hair was usually a mess anyway. I'm placing Anko under your care, got it? Naruto stated in mock seriousness. Obito simply gaped for a second before nodding slowly. Are you sure? If I wasn't, I wouldn't have asked. Keep her out of trouble, but if she doesn't behave let me know later and I'll straighten her out. He tossed a wink to the boy, and was mildly surprised to see the look of acceptance and determination pass across Obito's face. He ignored the whined, "Dad." That came from Anko, but shared a nod with Minato before waving to everyone else and disappearing in a swirl of leaves. Ah, Naruto. I've heard Anko passed the exam at the top of the current batch of graduates. Congratulations for a job well done. Naruto smiled internally at the praise, but on the outside he tried to keep the smile as nothing more than a twitch on his lips. Thank you, Hokage-sama. Hiruzen shuffled about with some things on his desk, grabbing 2 folders and holding them out for Naruto to take a look at. Moving forward to take the folders, he examined the covers, to see a name written on the one on top. It was a name that he recognized faintly, but wasn't very familiar with, even during the war. Those 2 may be of interest to you. Considering what you've done with little Anko, I feel you would be the best instructor for these 2 as well. You told me you wouldn't be opposed to taking on a team after Anko graduated, and well. The Hokage leaned back in his chair as his voice trailed off, and Naruto shot him a mock glare. I didn't mean the same day she graduated, old man. Hiruzen merely shrugged, offering the blonde a shrewd smile, semantics. Snorting as he shook his head, Naruto opened the file on top, only to see the face of a serious-looking young girl. Her hair was dark near the top of her head and was kept at about shoulder length, turning into a lighter violet near the ends. Azuki Yugao was not a name he heard often back in his time. About the most that he knew was that she was once in Anbu under Kakashi and had a boyfriend who was killed when Sand and Sound villages invaded them during the Chunin exams. He didn't know where she was during the war, and could only guess that she was killed as he didn't remember hearing of or about her at any time other than when Kakashi would tell stories about old missions he had been on. Apparently she had also just graduated this time around, and was ranked 6th in her class. Her focus was almost entirely on offense, and according to teachers' notes she seemed to have taken a liking to using a sword. However, it seemed that this desire of hers only appeared within the last few months, so she was still a complete novice. Otherwise she was perfectly competent in all other shinobi aspects. Closing her file, he tossed it into the chair next to him, then opened the other one. This recent graduate was a complete unknown for him, though the last name did ring a few bells. One was because of the name of the biju that had been sealed into him for years, and another because it was the clan name of a group of experienced genjutsu users that lived in the village. When he was younger he had to help the current heiress, Kurama Yakumo, overcome her own nightmares. This boy was Kurama Takuya, and he had already shown promise when using genjutsu. He was a little underwhelming with other, more physical aspects of being a shinobi, but that was understandable considering where his focus lay. Apparently the boy also had near-perfect chakra control, which would make him a good healer, should he be willing to pick up a few things. Other than that, everything else seemed rather average. His graduation ranking was even in the middle of his class, at 14. So you want me to take these two on, Hokage-sama? Yes. I was checking over Anko's graduation file and noticed that she very nearly excels at every category except chakra control. She would be the perfect balance between the other two selected there. Yugao has been focusing on more offensive aspects, while Takuya is more of a defensive type. Naruto let out a sigh before nodding and grabbing the file he had tossed on the chair. Placing them together, he handed them back to the Hokage. If you think it's a good idea, then I'll do it. When do I need to get them? Accepting the files, Hiruzen chuckled. Later this afternoon, around 3. The graduates were told to gather again after being dismissed this morning to get their congratulations from family and peers. I'll be having a brief meeting with the other Jonin sensei shortly. Enough time for me to warn my wife and apprentice'll be getting a team, then take a nap. I like it. Hiruzen snorted, then began to chuckle. Whatever you want. You've got a little over an hour. Don't make your students wait too long. Naruto grinned as he reviewed his own memories of having to wait nearly 2 hours for Kakashi to appear on their first day as a team. Mikoto would kill him if he was ever that late to anything. No wonder Kakashi always remained single. Bidding the Hokage farewell, he quickly made his way home to relay the news to his wife. After that, he'd take his nap, because if his old team was any indication, it could be a very long day. Yugao, are you excited? The purple-haired girl turned her head to look at her good friend, Maki. Of course I am. Maki frowned. You don't really look like you are. Are you daydreaming about your crush again? Shut up. I am not. Aha. I think that just gave it away. You're so cute when you blush. Yugao groaned, trying to hide her face as she turned away. She knew she shouldn't have said anything about her recent interest to any of her friends. She didn't even know his name, and only saw that he was really good with a sword. It was amazing to watch him dance around with his weapon, fighting invisible enemies. It looked so graceful, and she wanted to be able to do the same thing. As a result, she made the decision to pick up the use of the sword over the last 3 months of her academy education. There wasn't really anyone at the school willing to teach her yet, so she had been trying to teach herself through books and from observing others using weapons. She only hoped now that she got a teacher who could teach her a few things, or at least point her in the direction of someone who could. While Maki apparently decided to let go of any comments about Yugao's latest crush, that didn't stop her from asking anything else. So, who do you think they're going to team you with? I hope I get put with Ru. I hear he was second place in the class. Not only that, he's dreamy too. Yugao tossed a wry look at her friend, but Maki was too busy staring and sighing at a boy sitting a few rows in front of them who was talking animatedly to 2 of his friends. While, yes, he was smart and rather good looking too, she came from a family with a long history of shinobi service. If she was going after boys instead of concentrating on her studies, her family would be rather disappointed. Of course that didn't stop her from admiring her newest crush. The fact that he was so good with a sword was a bonus. Any other thoughts or comments from Maki were cut off as their Chunin instructor entered the room, quieting them down. As everyone moved back to their seats, he began speaking. First, Let me offer everyone in this room a heartfelt congratulations. You've all passed the graduation exam as well as the accelerated courses, and made me very proud. You're done here for now, though keep in mind some teachers may have their own tests to make sure you can all cut it on the field and not just in the classroom. The climate out there in the world is currently open warfare, though our village has not gotten completely involved yet. Your various senseis will want you to be able to operate as complete units. With that said, all of the team leaders are currently waiting outside this door. Be ready to work hard, because there is a lot to do in preparation for things to come. With that, His words were cut off as the door to the classroom slid open, and a young girl with hair nearly the same color as her own entered the room and promptly closed the door again behind her. She gave everyone a big smile before looking at the instructor. Sorry to interrupt, but my sensei said I should come and wait in here for when the rest of my team is announced. Yugao watched on as her instructor chuckled and pointed at one of the empty seats near the front. Sure thing, Anko-san. Have a seat right there in the front. It didn't take long for whispered conversations to start at that, and Yugao found herself getting a bit excited too. There were rumors in the beginning that she was being trained by a big shot Jonin, but it was all very hush-hush. For 2 years she'd heard rumors, not to mention that no one really saw much of Anko at all anymore. Then, just the other day, she had entered into the graduation exam with Yugao and the rest of her class. Most were shocked, and nearly everyone expected her to fail right away. Much to everyone's surprise, including the teachers, she had gone ahead and graduated right at the top of the class. Yugao thought it was amazing that Anko could accomplish that feat, even after having never spent a single day in school, and only being trained by her master. After the test was concluded, Mitarashi Anko was more than happy to tell everyone she was the apprentice for the one and only Uchiha Naruto. As a result, virtually everyone agreed that it wouldn't have been such a surprise that she passed the test if they had known. If for some reason a person didn't know who Anko was, they definitely knew who Naruto was. The man wasn't called the right hand of the Hokage for no reason. Yugao. Maki elbowed her in the side, quickly grabbing her attention. I still want to be on Ru's team, but. I want to be on Anko-san's team. Could you imagine being taught by Uchiha-sama? All Yugao could do was nod. Of course she'd want to have Uchiha-sama as a teacher. But he would probably take one of the most well-rounded teams, and since she only placed highly but not at the top, it was unlikely that she would be put there. Still, she could dream. She was about to respond to her friend, but the instructor began announcing teams so she remained silent. Team 1 is the following: Tamagashi Ru, Mitokado Juuki, and Hanataba Maki. Maki's squeal was sharp, but immediately silenced as the girl slapped her hand over her mouth. Everyone in the class was looking at her, and she slumped down in her chair as her face turned bright red. Clearing his throat, the instructor shook his head as he continued, Your Jonin-sensei is Agana Mio. Team 2 is still in rotation from last graduation, so Team 3 will be. Yugao kept one ear on what the instructor was saying in case she heard her name, but otherwise turned to look at Maki, who was slowly sitting back up and trying to ignore anyone still looking at her. Well, at least you got one of the things you wanted, right? Yugao whispered. Maki looked at her friend and smiled briefly, but then her eyes shifted to looking back down the row to where Ru was sitting. He must have been looking up at her, because Maki's eyes went wide and she immediately looked back down into her lap. Yugao struggled to keep from laughing, but somehow she managed. Shifting her full attention back to the front of the classroom, she tuned back in just as the instructor was finishing announcing Team 5. 6 was apparently still in rotation as well, so next up was Team 7. Team 7 will be Kurama Takuya, Azuki Yugao, and Mitarashi Anko. Your Jonin-sensei will be Uchiha Naruto. Yugao felt her heart stop. She would be having the Uchiha Naruto as her Jonin-sensei. This was like a dream come true, but she didn't think that she really deserved to be placed on a team under him. Sure, she was one of the top of the class, but she didn't really stand out in any areas. Not only that, but she didn't know if he'd want to keep her if she insisted on using a sword, which she really wanted to do. Yugao. Congratulations. A furious whisper in her ear brought her thoughts back into focus as she turned to look at Maki, who was giving her a huge smile. Who would have thought you'd be on his team? When Yugao didn't respond and instead stared straight ahead, Maki chuckled and continued listening to the rest of the teams being announced. Meanwhile, Yugao's eyes had sought out Anko, and was wondering why the girl was looking back at her with a big grin on her face. The only legitimate reason she could think of was that Anko already knew who was on her team and what they looked like. However, as the instructor finished announcing the teams and congratulated them all once again, she found herself quickly not caring as the first Jonin-sensei entered the room and Maki waved goodbye. She was going to be on Uchiha Naruto-sama's team. Even if he didn't want to keep her for whatever reason, she'd learn everything she could as fast as he was willing to teach. Naruto grinned as he walked behind his new team. They were on their way to Training Ground 7, otherwise still known as his home away from home. Most of the time each team was assigned their own individual ground that matched their team number, but occasionally some teams had to share. For whatever reason, Team 7 was only allocated to what were considered special cases, and that included one of the largest training grounds. Hiruzen's old team was Team 7, as was Jiraiya's. Strangely, Minato was on Team 5, but Kushina was on Team 7. After Kushina's team graduated, there had been no further Team 7 until now. It had been a few years. For some reason he could have sworn that Kakashi was on Team 7 in his time, but they were instead Team 6 that was still in rotation from the last graduation. He watched as Anko chatted away at Yugao, who at least appeared to be giving the slightly younger girl her full attention. Takuya was a step or two behind the girls, apparently listening in as well but not commenting. Other than telling his new team to head for the training ground, he hadn't said a word. He'd noticed Yugao sneak him plenty of glances, and even Takuya had glanced at him a few times, but neither of them had said another word or tried to approach him in any way. He had a number of guesses as to why, but for the moment simply chalked it up to them being incredibly nervous around him. Thankfully Anko was as talkative as she was, otherwise the silence may have made things even more awkward than they already were. Upon arrival at the training area, Anko hopped over and sat down in the middle of a small clearing. It was her usual spot when she was here training with him. She beckoned him over, but both of his other charges glanced back at Naruto to see if they should go ahead and have a seat. Naruto smiled at them both. We'll go ahead and get started with introductions, and then move on to what we need to accomplish as a team. Yugao and Takuya immediately moved to sit down next to Anko, one on either side. I guess since I'm your team leader and trainer, I'll get started. My name is Uchiha Naruto. I like ramen, my wife, my clan, Anko, my friends, and the village. My immediate goal is to make you three the best team to ever come out of Konoha. My dream is to bring peace to the shinobi world, retire, and have lots of grandkids. Yugao and Yakuya were just staring at him, wide-eyed, while Anko was simply looking at him with a small smile. Not surprising since Anko already knew all of that, but he'd have to bring Yugao and Takuya back down to earth and not place him on some kind of pedestal. Respect was fine, but he didn't need worship. Anko, why don't you go next? Okay, Anko chirped. My name is Mitarashi Anko. I like Dango, my mom and dad, Minato-sensei and his team, and Kushina Onizen. My goal is to be a Chunin before I'm 10. My dream is to be known all over the world as one of the strongest kunoichi ever. She grinned, looking back and forth between her two new teammates. Takuya looked slightly amused, while Yugao was appraising the other girl with a critical eye. Before anyone else could say a word, Naruto pointed at the Kurama boy. Okay, Takuya, you next. The boy looked at everyone one time before nodding his head. My name is Kurama Takuya, of the Kurama clan. I like genjutsu, my brother and uncle, and helping and healing people that need it. My immediate goal. Takuya's voice drifted for a moment and he looked up into the trees for a moment, is to master my clan's genjutsu techniques. My dream is to get the clan to focus on more than just genjutsu, so we aren't looked down upon by other clans in the village. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. Being honest, other than Yakumo, he didn't really know anyone from the clan well. Heck, he didn't really ever get to know Yakumo well either. After he had helped her get the Edo under control, the Kurama clan appreciated what he did, but they didn't exactly want him hanging around. He didn't understand it then, but now that he was older and thought about it, perhaps he wasn't the kind of permanent influence they wanted around the girl. He knew well just from being married to Mikoto that clan politics dictated a lot about the ways clans operated, and he wasn't exactly someone noteworthy then. They probably didn't want Yakumo gaining any further interest in him. Nodding at Takuya, he moved his attention to Yugao, who squirmed a little and wouldn't look him in the eye. Your turn, Yugao. Why yes. My name is Izuki Yugao. We're not a clan, but my family has a long decorated history of serving as shinobi even before Konoha existed, and I am of the 6th generation. I like training, spending time with family, and swords. My goal is to become a master in Kenjutsu. My dream is to be a respected member of Anbu so I can protect my home, and to have a family someday. Excellent goals and dreams, all of you. For our first order of business, I will tell you all that there will be no further testing. We are officially Team 7 right now. Understood. Anko simply grinned while Yugao looked stunned. Takuya, however, slowly raised a hand. You don't need to treat this like a classroom, Takuya-kun. Just ask. Oh, okay. Are you sure we don't need to be tested? Our instructor made it sound like all the teams would be tested again. They can be, sure, Naruto shrugged. But it's our prerogative as Jonin-sensei. I've already been training Anko for the past couple years so I know what she's capable of. Neither of you realize it but the Hokage picked both of you specifically to be placed on my team. I have faith that none of you will let me down. Will you? All three of them immediately shook their heads negatively. Good. Then that's all I need. I will train you all into the ground, but you'll be better off for it. One thing I want to tell you all is that you can relax around me. Yes, I'm the husband of the Uchiha clan leader, and have fought Biju and Jinchuriki and lived to tell the tale, among other things. But I'm still Naruto, so there will be none of that, Uchiha-sama, stuff when you're around me. It's either Naruto or Naruto-sensei. Understood. The three of them immediately agreed vocally, two of them calling him sensei while the third called him father. Needless to say, the other two couldn't help but stare at Anko, who was grinning cheekily. Naruto simply gave her a deadpan stare. What dear Anko means is that I've tried to adopt her in the past but because of clan laws being what they are, I cannot apprentice someone in my own clan. So she kept her name, though we still have something of a strange father-daughter relationship. That does not mean, however, that she will be getting any special treatment from me. Or, you're no fun. Anko stuck her tongue out at Naruto, only for him to sigh and rub his forehead. Anyway, all of you can take the rest of the day off. Get some good rest, because training starts in full force tomorrow. I'll be talking with all three of you to see what you'd like to specialize in, and we'll go from there. Any questions? When there were none, he simply nodded and dismissed them. It didn't take long for the three to leave. Smiling as he watched them go, once the last one was out of sight he turned his head towards one of the trees nearby. Going to sit up there all day, are you? There was a faint laugh followed by the rustling of branches, and then Kushina appeared at the bottom of the tree trunk. She had her long hair done up in some incredible braids. It made him wonder just who had the patience to do that. No fair, Anarchy. No matter how hard I try to hide myself and Kyubi, you can always find me. Naruto grinned at her and let out a chuckle. Let's just say that I cheat when I find you. Your presence is like a beacon to me. Kushina stopped walking towards him, and began to look at him curiously. Naruto knew that comment caught her off guard, if only because it had been a while since he had mentioned anything about it. Is this about my special chakras again? Naruto had been training quite a lot with his sister, especially over the course of the last year. While she had been participating in plenty of missions, as a Jinchuriki they didn't want her wandering too far from Konoha proper, and Kushina knew this as well. Therefore her opportunities to take anything above C rank were very few and far between. While Minato was busy with training to be Hokage and Mikoto was working with the Uchiha clan, Naruto took Kushina aside to get her up to speed, combat-wise. She was a brawl fighter, much like he used to be, though she was able to work her chakra chains into her techniques. With some experimentation Naruto found that he was able to use the chains as well, though he needed to use more concentration than he was willing to spare in order to get them to work. It was one of the things that probably made Kushina's chakra special. Even if she wasn't the best at controlling it, hers seemed to be incredibly versatile and she didn't really need to concentrate at all. She just thought about them and they did what she wanted. Needless to say, she believed only someone with Uzumaki chakra could even make the chains and not be completely exhausted, so if she had ever had any doubts about him not being of Uzumaki blood it was immediately eliminated. Naruto wasn't entirely certain how much truth there was to that, but since he didn't have any factual evidence to the contrary, he let it be. When she had seen how quickly he managed to train Anko, she had requested that he train her a little as well when he had time. Naruto was more than happy to oblige, as he was approaching the time that he was going to tell her about Kurama. In order for her to get along with and use Kurama's chakra without hurting herself, though, she needed to have a certain mindset. He was doing his best through training to prepare her, especially to be open-minded. If she went off on Kurama when they were to be officially introduced, the Biju might not work with her on principle. They had been partners for years, but he couldn't speak for the oversized fox and it would likely be at least somewhat grumpy from being locked away so long. Even thought Hey both agreed it was highly likely that would be the case. Having worked with Kushina for a little over a year now, he was confident in her abilities as a kunoichi, especially when it came to Tai and ninjutsu. Her fuinjutsu was leagues above his, though she promised to help teach him in exchange for everything he had been helping her with. In the last 2 months she had followed up on that promise, and began tutoring him in the esoteric ninja art. She had also mellowed out quite a bit from the rambunctious teen she used to be. That wasn't to say she no longer had wild moments, because she certainly did, but she was much more calm in general, and looked at life a little more seriously. Mikoto and Minato both agreed with him, and after further discussion with his wife and Hiruzen, they agreed it was time for Kushina to know about Naruto's alternate future and be trained as a Jinchuriki. Sighing out loud, the blonde pushed a hand back through his short, spiky hair. It's actually good that you came to spy on my new team, because I need to talk to you about a couple things that are going to sound pretty crazy. All I can do is ask that you give me time to explain, and I'll answer all your questions. I can also promise that what I have to say and do will not hurt me, you, or anyone else in Konoha that we care about. Okay. Kushina's expression went from curious to wary, and her posture shifted to the defensive, but was otherwise standing her ground. After staring at him seriously for a moment, she slowly nodded her head. What is it? Taking a deep breath, Naruto made sure to look directly into her dark blue eyes. I need to talk to the Kyuubi. It's about time you showed up, Naruto. Do you know how uncomfortable it is being held like this? I know you needed to take your time for obvious reasons, but it was starting to get ridiculous. Naruto winced as he looked at Kurama's condition. The fox was being held up against a huge earthen-looking sphere. Large stakes had been driven through each of his 4 extremities, all of his tails, and a large one right through the middle of his gut. If that wasn't enough, to add insult to injury, he was also being held down by Kushina's chakra chains. The blonde turned to his future mother, only to see her staring at him, open-mouthed. Naruto simply stared back, nonplussed. What? Her mouth opened and closed a few times before she pointed at him and exclaimed, "The fox knows you." How? Why did this never get talked about all those times before when we were training? You mean you still haven't told her anything yet? Idiot. Naruto shot Kurama a small glare. You know I couldn't. We talked about it before. Besides, it's not like you said anything either. Can you see anything from here at all? No. It's too muffled, unless Kushina decides to visit me for some reason. But since she has no reason to other than to check the seal, I don't see her much. It's not like we ever really talked, either. You know my history. Holding back a sigh, Naruto instead frowned slightly before nodding at the fox Biju. Turning back to the redhead, the frown was quickly replaced by a smile at the utterly flabbergasted expression on her face. She focused on him when she saw him point at the fox. Do you think you can let the poor guy down? That looks uncomfortable. Damn right it is. Nothing like getting an itch and not being able to scratch it. Not to mention a constant stomachache. Kushina looked too stunned to be able to say anything coherent, though her expression eventually evened out as she sighed. Rubbing her forehead, she simply looked back and forth between the fox and the person she looked towards as an older brother. This is a dream, right? It's all a dream, and I'm going to wake up any minute. Naruto couldn't stop the chuckle that escaped his lips. I'm afraid not. There's a bunch of things I need to tell you, but first, don't make me get down on my knees and beg you to let Kurama down. Why do you want? Wait. Kurama. Yeah. Naruto jerked his thumb back over his shoulder, in the fox's direction. That's the fuzzball's name after all. Hey, I'm not a fuzzball, brat. I swear, when I get down from here. The fox let out a decent growl, but it amused Naruto far more than it scared him. Even if Kushina was willing to let the Biju down, it appeared as though she was quickly deciding to keep him chained up. Realizing he had to do something about it, the blonde thought of something that he believed would make Kurama seem a little less imposing. Leaning forward conspiratorially, Naruto cupped one of his hands and held it against the side of his mouth, whispering loudly, "So he says. I just think he's a big fuzzball that likes to be rubbed behind the ears, but you didn't hear that from me." His whisper, if one could call it that, wasn't quiet in the least, and Kurama's enhanced hearing could easily pick it up. The Biju continued with his low growl, but didn't say anything. Kushina, on the other hand, was now staring at the fox with something resembling awe. "Pet, behind the ears, you say?" Naruto nodded slowly as he leaned back and away, looking like the cat who got the canary. "Aha, if you get the right spot, sometimes his back leg does this little kicking thing." Kurama stopped growling and quickly looked away, scowling but obviously embarrassed. At almost the exact same time, Kushina let out a squeal, then immediately removed the chakra chains without another thought. Lifting up her shirt so that her midriff was exposed, she made a twisting motion in front of her abdomen. Naruto observed as the seal darkened and the swirl in the center extended, stretching out beyond the boundary line of the original seal. Before it got too far, however, a fancy script appeared around the outside of the old seal line, stopping the swirl before it expanded too far. Naruto turned to look up at the Biju, and watched as the stakes disappeared one by one. The earthen ball behind Kurama began to crumble, and then both it and the Biju fell to whatever invisible surface it was that they were standing on. As Naruto moved over to greet his old friend who began to stretch, he beckoned for Kushina to follow him. She did quickly fall into step behind him, though she still kept her distance. Once he got close enough, he held up his fist at Kurama, who had finished stretching and settled to look down at the blonde. "Yo. Sorry it took me so long to get here. I've tried to get as much done as I could before I came to get you, since I knew that once I did that things would begin to change drastically." Kurama smirked, then moved his large fist to bump against Naruto's, symbolizing their friendship after years of working together. "Well, you weren't an idiot for once and actually followed the plan, so I can't complain too much." Chuckling and shrugging off the barb, Naruto looked over at Kushina, who was pretty much just looking between the two of them in amazement. Waving his hand in the direction of the fox with a great flourish, he said, "Kushina-chan, allow me to introduce you properly to my best friend and partner, Kurama. Also sometimes known as, his demon lordship, the nine-tailed demon fox, Fuzzball, and Oof." Kurama lightly flicked him in the back with a fingernail, sending him sprawling a few feet. "What have I said about calling me Fuzzball, Birdbrain?" Naruto climbed back to his feet, dusting the imaginary dirt off his pants as he scowled up at the Biju. "Hey, I'm not a birdbrain." "Oh yeah? Well, what about that time when?" Kurama's voice trailed off as Kushina bent forward, holding her stomach as she let out peals of laughter. Both Kurama and Naruto looked at each other and grinned. It seemed the first part of their plan to get her to open up had passed. Still, Naruto couldn't help but feel a bit nervous about what was to come. It was strangely easier with Mikoto, if only because they had no previous interaction, so anything that happened would just happen. His relationship with Kushina was much different though, and he didn't want to strain anything between them. Unfortunately, since he took so long to tell her anything about where he came from, it just might. Taking a deep breath, Naruto decided to begin his tale. If he managed to get away in one piece if she came after him, he'd consider himself lucky. Maybe Kurama would be able to save him. Maybe. So let me get this straight. You're from some sort of alternate universe future where I was your mother, Minato was your father, Rin and Obito were dead, Kakashi was a tardy pervert, and you only ever met Mikoto once but were rivals with and eventually ended up killing her son Sasuke. After 16 years you and Kurama made up when the Fourth War started, and had been fighting it for a few more years before using an old seal from Azushiogakur that sent you back in time. The two of them were slowly walking around one of the deserted training areas. Naruto had some clones make sure of that, talking quietly. Naruto nodded slowly, as that was a fairly decent summary over what he had explained in her mindscape. They probably spent about 4 or 5 hours talking in the seal, and luckily since their brains worked so much faster than if they were conversing in the real world, to anyone who happened upon them it would have only looked like they were meditating for about 15 minutes. Now that they were out, she wanted a quick recap just to make sure that she didn't dream the whole thing. That about sums it up, yeah. Kushina snorted, it sounds ridiculous. If it wasn't for Kurama agreeing with everything, I don't think I'd believe you. Even having Kurama willing to talk to me after all this time is really weird, but I gave to admit to having known about some pretty crazy things. This is definitely at the top now, though. Naruto wasn't surprised. He likely wouldn't have believed himself either. Hell, eventually it took him dragging Mikoto to the Hokage to get her to finally believe that everything he told her was the truth. She had believed him at first, or so he thought, but over the course of several weeks he began to realize that she likely had a hard time believing every word he said about where he was from. Luckily for him, a visit to Hiruzen was all he needed. Hopefully he wouldn't need another for Kushina. Minato would be next, but he had a feeling Minato already knew more, or at least believed he knew more than he let on. So, Naruto. Kushina stopped walking, and brought her fingertips up, pressing them together in a timid gesture. Is it strange for you to look at me and not call me your mother? The blonde's head shifted to the side a bit when he noticed she was no longer next to him. Her posture was very closed off at the moment, and it reminded him strongly of the Hinata of his time. She was still looking straight ahead, but he could tell that her face had a slightly reddish tint to it. At first, yeah, he chuckled. But it didn't last very long. I had only met you very, very briefly from within my own seal that contained Kurama. I never really knew the you from where I come from. But when I got here I sort of settled into the role of your big brother. It was comfortable, and I could still be close to you without having to worry about messing things up with the timeline. A short laugh from Kushina cut him off. When he turned to look at her, she shook her head and looked away, trying to hide her face. What is it? Nothing, really. She turned to favor him with a shy smile before looking away again. It's funny to think about it now, but after Mikoto-ne and I heard you talking about us to Ero-Senin from the hot springs, I started to crush on you a little bit. Of course it was a bit weird because I still loved Minato at the same time, but I was also really interested in you. Not quite sure what to say to that, Naruto simply settled for scratching at the back of his head and grinning. I'm flattered, but it wouldn't have worked out. He listened to her laugh and watched her nod in response. After that, silence settled between them for several moments before she spoke again in a somewhat halting tone. Naruto, is it still okay if I call you Aniki? The blonde was quick to nod. Of course. Besides, when you and Minato have kids I want to be the uncle that gets to spoil them. When Kushina didn't immediately respond, he was going to ask if something was wrong, but she turned her body in his direction and moved forward quickly, grabbing him into a tight hug. Naruto was surprised at first and eventually came to his senses when he felt her hands clutch at the back of his shinobi vest, hugging him tighter. He eventually returned the hug. Kushina-chan. Thank you, Naruto Aniki. Thank you. Oh, of course. They remained like that for a few moments, simply holding each other. Naruto looked around where they were. It was a rather picturesque scene, a few fluffy clouds in the bright blue sky, plenty of green grass below them with trees scattered about here and there. A small stream that acted as a tributary to the Naka River wasn't too far away either, he could hear the faint noise of moving water from where they were. So what should I do now? Naruto was curious as to what she was referring to. Kushina released the hug and backed away a step, wiping at her eyes. I mean, am I the only one that knows this other than Hokage-sama? Of course Hokage-sama knows all this, right? Yes. He was one of the first to know. There are 7 others that know, maybe 8, though I've only told 5. Can you tell me who? Kushina stopped rubbing at her eyes to stare up at him, obviously eager to find out if it was anyone she knew. Sure. Other than Hokage-sama, there is Shimura Danzo, Hitaki Sakumo, Yamanaki Inoiki, Mitokado Homura, Uchitain Koharu, and Mikoto. Inoiki-kun. Really? Naruto tapped his temple with a finger. When I arrived here, he was the one I trusted most from my time to walk my mind. I wanted to extend that trust to now because I know the type of man he will become. Kushina nodded, tapping at her chin as she looked away. Mikoto-ne also knows. I know I shouldn't be surprised, but I am. She hasn't said a word to me about it. Well, she is my wife, and I didn't want her to marry me and not know who I really am. I think her father also knows some things, but I don't know how much Mikoto and Hokage-sama have told him. I haven't told him anything though, and he hasn't asked either. He just seems to know things. As for not telling you anything, you're the one who does all the talking. Sticking her tongue out at him for his last comment, Kushina gave another nod, but didn't say anything further. Silence settled between them once again until an idea popped into Naruto's head. Hey, I was thinking that it may be possible to change our Jinchuriki seals a bit to allow Kurama's consciousness to travel between us. What? How? I still have at least some of Kurama's chakra inside of me. Naruto rubbed his stomach unconsciously, though I haven't used any of it, obviously. I didn't need people to start asking questions even though it looks like you've wanted to ask from time to time. I'm pretty sure my control has slipped and you felt it. Naruto grinned a little as Kushina gave him a knowing look and a small nod. I didn't really think too much about it before, but now that you mention it, yes. Naruto grinned. Anyway, I don't know if the Biju chakra I have will regenerate without him actually being in my seal. I was thinking of using something similar to Minato's Hiraishin that would allow Kurama to travel back and forth between us. If I can do that, if Toby ever comes for you, then Kurama can just move over to me and there won't be anything to remove from you. He'll just be confused as hell. Having heard the horrid story of her death, Kushina immediately brightened. You think that will work? Well, I don't know for sure since I've never heard about anything like that being done before, but it's better than nothing, right? Kushina thought about it for another moment before finally agreeing. You're right. It's been a while since I've bothered doing any Fuinjutsu research, and it beats simply training to beat someone that I may never have to fight if we can get it to work. I promise that no child of mine will be without a parent. She was staring at him so seriously when she said that, he couldn't help but let out a sigh and immediately relax. Thank you. Frowning at him for a moment, Kushina asked, the way you sighed, was that your objective all along? A part of it. I don't want you, or Minato, or Mikoto to die, obviously. But there may come a time or two that I need to borrow Kurama for a mission or to take care of someone or something before it becomes a problem, you know. Assuming we get the transfer to work, I mean. Thinking about it for a moment, the redhead crossed her arms over her chest as she stared at the blonde with a piercing gaze. Knowing what responsibilities he had as a Jinchuriki, he knew Kushina had the same ones on her. The thought of transferring the Biju to another, even if it was just temporary. Naruto would have immediately shot it down in his time. The only reason Kushina likely hadn't immediately done the same was because of both who he was and who he claimed to be. I'm okay with it, on one condition. One of Naruto's eyebrows raised slightly, which is, teach me to use Kurama's chakra. Even though that caught him by surprise, he managed to keep his face even. If you think back, I've already been trying to train you in a way to prepare to use it. I have no problem training you more, and I'm sure Kurama will be more than happy to stretch his legs again. However, there is a condition to your condition. You'll need to befriend Kurama on your own and prove yourself to him before he'll consent to working with you. So how do I do that? Naruto shrugged. Start by talking to him and getting to know him. That's what I did, and he's pretty much one of my best friends now. As soon as he finished talking, Kushina dropped down to the ground and sat with her legs crossed, taking up a meditative pose. Alright, I'm gonna get started then. Don't take things too fast or he'll just get annoyed. Get to know him normally, because he's just gonna ignore you if you try too hard. Kushina went to reply, but before she could say anything she froze and her eyes went wide. Then she began to laugh. Needless to say, Naruto was a bit confused. What's going on? Kurama heard you. He says, tell that brat Naruto to shut up, I'm tired of listening to him talk about me. TCH, next time I see that furball I'm gonna teach him a lesson, Naruto grumbled. The redhead grinned at him but didn't really say anything, closing her eyes as she shifted into her meditation. Taking this as a cue to leave, Naruto glanced up at where the sun was in the sky. It was high above, which meant that it was probably about time to get to a meeting he was not really looking forward to. Looking at Kushina one more time, he bent down and gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead before heading off towards the Hokage's office. Enter. Quickly entering the room and closing the door behind him, Naruto took a look around. He wasn't surprised to see that he was one of only 3 people in the room, the other 2 being the Hokage and Orochimaru. A part of him was always antsy whenever the Pale Man was nearby, but over the years he had gotten used to it. He had been expecting to have some kind of confrontation with the man regarding the status of Anko, but surprisingly nothing happened. That made him wonder why Orochimaru had chosen the girl in the first place. The Anko from his time had remembered nothing about it, but had lost most of her memories of that time anyway and tried not to dwell on it. Ah, Naruto-kun. Thank you for showing up. Since you're both here, we can just go ahead and get started a little early. Naruto nodded his head as he stepped up next to Orochimaru, while the man himself replied with a quiet, "Yes, sensei." Seeing them both standing there, Hiruzen leaned back slightly in his seat and crossed his arms over his chest. "Orochimaru, would you like to explain the purpose behind your laboratories?" The snake summoner's head tilted to the side slightly, but he appeared otherwise unperturbed. "I've already explained their functions to you, sensei." "Yes, about most of them." Hiruzen stared straight at his student. "I'm talking about the two we discovered in Sector B4, as well as the one in C7. I don't recall you telling me anything about those." Naruto was trying to observe Orochimaru without appearing too obvious. Currently the man was acting as if there was nothing at all wrong. "My apologies, sensei, these labs were not really being used for more than storage, so I didn't really think they needed to be mentioned." The Hokage simply sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Perhaps I should start this conversation another way. Orochimaru-kun, let me formally introduce you to Uchiha Naruto, the Rokudaime Hokage." Orochimaru turned to look at the blonde, first with surprise, but then pure confusion worked its way onto his face. Naruto would have laughed had the situation not been so serious. "Roku, but didn't you just decide upon the Yondaime? Not to mention a Godaime?" Hiruzen chuckled. "Well, I know who the Godaime might have been, but it's only a matter of waiting for the war to end before Minato takes up his position full time. But let's not wander too far and instead cut to the chase. Naruto-kun is from the future, and traveled to the past through the use of a very complex seal he discovered in the ruins of Uzushiogakure." Orochimaru's eyes immediately began to glow. "A seal, you say? Can we organize a group to go there and recover?" The Hokage held up his hand, stalling the comment. "I've already long since dispatched a team to destroy that particular ruin. Naruto-kun is the only one here with the knowledge, and it will die with him unless a situation arises where it is needed. Like the situation he found himself in before coming here." The pale man simply turned to Naruto, as if waiting for him to continue the explanation. Figuring he might as well, he began to explain. "We were in the middle of the Fourth Shinobi World War. We were losing. Badly. Konoha was losing. No. The entire world was losing. It was all of us against one madman." Orochimaru's eyebrows shot upwards before his eyes quickly narrowed. "Are you trying to imply that it was me?" "No, you've been dead to the best of our knowledge, or were dead, rather, for about a year before the war started." That comment completely stunned the man, who took an involuntary step backward. What? Dead? How? A man named Uchiha Sasuke. Orochimaru looked between the Hokage and the blonde, gauging both for a moment before speaking again. "Am I to assume this little meeting is to ask me for my continued cooperation with whatever I'm doing in exchange for having this Sasuke taken care of?" "That won't be necessary," Naruto began, "since Sasuke will no longer exist as the person I knew him as. He was my classmate. But I'm from the future, remember?" "Yes, and he's Uchiha Sasuke. I'm now Uchiha Naruto. Not to mention the fact that I've completely, if unintentionally, eliminated the chance of him returning to the way he was by marrying his mother." "You mean Uchiha Mikoto?" "Yes. My wife now was his mother in my past. She had married Uchiha Fugaku." "I see." Orochimaru was eyeing him warily now. "So what is my purpose for being here?" Naruto sighed before sitting down in one of the chairs, trying to appear completely relaxed so that he wouldn't set the man any further on edge. If he made him bolt early, there would be no salvaging the situation. "I convinced the old man here that while you became a monster in my time, you were still a genius. You came up with many incredible techniques that could see quite a few useful and practical applications. The only problem was giving you something that would keep you interested, as you didn't truly become a monster until you started experimenting on children and newborns, taking them from orphanages during the war and sometimes directly from their parents. Even I might have been able to overlook how distasteful that was if you had been taking them from places outside of Konoha, but you took them from in the village too." To Orochimaru's credit, even he looked rather shocked and sickened from what his counterpart had done. Apparently he hadn't fallen that far yet, which Naruto considered to be a very good thing. "It's no secret that you had aspirations for the Hokage position, but I'm going to tell you now that you'll have to give that up. It would be pointless to put someone with your talent behind a desk doing paperwork all day. After brainstorming a bit, the old man and I have come up with a few ideas that we'd like to run by you." The two of them began explaining the situation to the snake summoner, starting from the very beginning of what they knew about him. Naruto had to fill in most of the information based upon the Orochimaru that he knew once upon a time. While they were adamant about him not experimenting on young children anymore, they were still alright with experiments so long as there were no abductions. Asking for volunteers and paying them for their service was something that even Hiruzen was willing to have the village fund, to a certain extent. The Hokage was also willing to allow potentially lethal experiments on notoriously bad criminals, bandits, Nukanen and their ilk. But even that would be under strict observation. Essentially, we want you to be in charge of a new division within Konoha. You'll report directly to the Hokage, whoever the Jonin commander at the time is, and myself. You'll focus on medical advancements and the creation of advanced medical shinobi, while at times also operating under the radar and performing subterfuge. Orochimaru was sitting there, obviously absorbing all this with glee. The more they put on the table, the easier it was for him to marginalize the loss of having stricter experimentation constraints. The ability to do his own thing. We realize some experiments may be too risky to keep here in Konoha proper, Hiruzen began, so Naruto-kun had a pretty good idea. At one point once you left Konoha, you created a village of your own called Sound in Ricefield Country. He says it wasn't a true village, but it was more a series of fortified bunkers and caves that you used for your operations. The pale man turned to look questioningly at the blonde, who nodded. It's true. I'd suggest that you recreate at least some of what it was soon after the war ends, and make better use of the Fuma clan than you did last time around. Not only that, but I have a list of people who you should keep an eye out for that worked under you before, and perhaps would be willing to again. Keep in mind a lot of them aren't even born yet, so you'll have to wait a few years for the largest bulking up of your division. Unlike when you made Sound, you'll have the backing of Konoha after this. A lot of the other villages will be upset with us making bases all over, but by the same token we've held back from this war because the other villages know how powerful we are now. Once we do enter the war, the ending will be swift and decisive, so no one will bat an eyelash when we tell them it's the best way to make sure peace is maintained. It was a stretch to ask the man to wait that long, not to mention how obvious it was that they were telling Orochimaru he could do his own thing outside of Konoha proper so long as he didn't go against them. Naruto knew it, Hiruzen knew it, and it was obvious to the both of them that Orochimaru knew it. I see. Is there anything else? Naruto and Hiruzen looked at each other, and the Hokage gave the blonde a short shake of his head. Naruto turned to look at Orochimaru once again. Not right now, no. Start coming up with plans and pass it by us, and if you have any questions about the future you can ask me. I'll tell you what I can, but keep in mind that I would still like to keep things as close to the original timeline as possible so we can have some kind of warning about what will happen. There are already a bunch of things that have changed, so as time drags on, I'll be doing more guessing than anything else. I understand. Orochimaru looked towards the door, and then back at the Hokage. If you'll excuse me, Sensei, I have many plans to write down that I shall run by you and Naruto-san later. Am I permitted to ask Tsunade and Jiraiya for assistance? So long as you do it tomorrow. My next meeting is with those two, to bring them up to speed. Yes, Sensei. Thank you. Orochimaru gave Hiruzen a quick bow before turning to Naruto and doing the same. Once done, he promptly moved to exit the room, likely excited about future prospects. I think that went well. Naruto nodded towards Hiruzen. That it did. I was trying not to imagine all sorts of horrible scenarios. But since he'll be having constant consultations with the both of us, we will hopefully be able to keep him well behaved and helping us this time around. I agree. If not, I have confidence that you or I would be able to put him down. Anyway, would you like to go get something to eat before our next meeting? Sure. Anything in mind? Naruto began to stretch as he stood up from the chair, trying not to think about what he was told the last time Sarutobi tried to put Orochimaru down. Well, rumor has it that there is this really good ramen stand that you and Minato often visit. The meeting with the other two members of the Densetsu no Sanin went exactly as Naruto had expected it to. Jiraiya was all over him asking about the success of his novels, while Tsunade merely took it in stride, claiming that there were several suspicious things about him that never quite added up. Still, she chose to trust him considering his position in the village and the fact that her sensei obviously trusted him. It also explained why he insisted on continuing to use ridiculous nicknames for them. Their meeting was shorter than the one with Orochimaru, but no less important. Soon it agreed to start a regimen and work with Orochimaru to get more medical ninja into their active roster, while Jiraiya had agreed with Naruto about finding Nagato once again before the Third War got into full swing. Hiruzen, meanwhile, was going to have a long talk with Danzo and try to keep any ideas out of his head about conspiring with Hanzo. Naruto was fuzzy on the details, but he gleaned enough from the chat he had with Nagato to know that it was one of the man's major turning points, if not the most important one. At least those meetings were interesting, if not only because he was changing fate, but because they were largely important and he knew that doing these things now would make the future a better place. The meeting he was in now, sadly, was nowhere near as entertaining. All we were able to get from him, Mikoto-sama. My apologies. The blonde watched as his wife shook her head and sighed. It's understandable, Takeru-san. I can understand why they wouldn't want to move. I'll go talk to them tomorrow and see if we can come to an understanding. Is there anything else? No, Mikoto-sama. Very well. Dismissed. The young man named Takeru rose from his kneeling position, and upon offering Mikoto and Naruto both a quick bow, he left the room and closed the sliding door behind him. As soon as the footsteps of his departure completely disappeared, Mikoto let out a huge sigh and leaned back, sprawling across the floor. Tired. Naruto couldn't hold back a chuckle. Mikoto simply tossed him a half-hearted glare. Of course I am. Listening to people whine and complain would take it out of anyone. True. At least there isn't nearly as much when you first took over a year ago. All he got in response was a grunt, causing him to smile. It was true that there was less and less for her to do, which he interpreted as a good sign. They'd been making huge strides in getting the clan to be rather self-sufficient and not reliant on those in charge to take care of everything. There were still complicated matters that had to be brought before him and Mikoto, of course, however they were slowly but surely shrinking in number. Naruto, his wife moaned as she stretched. Yes. Naruto graced her once again with an amused smile. Mikoto rolled over so that she was facing him. I've been doing some thinking lately. Naruto waited for her to continue, but she didn't. She had her eyes closed and an expectant expression on her face, as if she was waiting for him to ask. About. Her eyes immediately opened and she smiled at him. I want to start a family. Having Anko around has been making me think about it more and more. The blonde felt his heart lurch at that comment. It had always been a dream of his, and there was no doubt whatsoever that they could afford to start a family, but he had made a habit of respecting Mikoto's wishes and rarely pushed his own ideas upon her unless she asked for them. He had been ready for a kid 6 months into their marriage, but Mikoto wanted to wait until they had the clan firmly under their control. She didn't want either of them to have to deal with a child on top of the current responsibilities. It was a good choice, as the stress from her taking on the leadership of the Uchiha clan could have posed problems to her health and that of her child, something he wasn't willing to risk. Ninja life was already stressful enough. If you feel you're ready, then I'm good to start whenever you are. Really? Mikoto chuckled, and her smile turned into a sly grin as she adjusted herself from where she was laying. Rolling over completely, she got onto her hands and knees and started crawling towards him. What if I said I wanted to get started right now? Naruto's eyebrows had almost jumped up all the way to his hairline. What? Here. Are you serious? MMHMM. Mikoto was taking her time getting over to him, moving slow and sensuously while staring into his eyes. Where had the nervous Mikoto gone when they were first starting to get to know each other? Oh, right. That Mikoto had disappeared once she and Kushina had somehow gotten a hold of one of Jiraiya's Ika manuscripts, probably one he had been proofreading for the man. Once she figured out exactly how much power she could hold over him, she never let it go. Not that he was complaining. Of course not. Shouldn't we at least, I don't know, block the door? I have no more scheduled meetings. No one else should even be in the building. She had finally reached him, and slowly pulled herself up by placing her hands on his shoulders. That's true, but isn't there always that one last person that shows up with an emergency when you least expect it? I'm still finding myself not really caring. Mikoto had managed to climb up and into his lap now, and straddled him, wrapping her long legs around his waist. Her hands began playing with the zipper on the front of his vest, slowly pulling it down. We do tend to make a lot of noise, you know. I haven't put up silencing seals around here, so don't you think tar? His speech was cut off as Mikoto forcefully kissed him, pressing her body up against his. The kiss itself only lasted for a few seconds before she pulled back, and stared straight at him. I want a bed, darling. All it took was a quick one-handed seal and they almost immediately appeared in their bedroom. I guess it's a good thing I know how to use the Harasshan. Just don't tell Minato yet, okay? The wink that followed caused a smile to break the look of surprise on Mikoto's face, but even that smile turned into more of a perverted leer as she forcefully pushed him back on their bed. You want my silence? It will cost you. How much? At this point, Naruto knew she was just playing with him. He couldn't help but be drawn in and play along. Quite a lot, I'm afraid, Mikoto whispered before she licked her lips. Climbing over him, she started tugging on the zipper of her own Jonin vest. I hope you're prepared, because it's going to take all night to pay what you owe. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.